today is Jonathan Shaheen, who is a postdoctoral researcher of the research organization Flanders at Ghent University, as well as a guest researcher at Stockholm University. And I think he's speaking with us today from Sweden. He's working on a monograph on Cavendish's metaphysics, provisionally titled The Superheroic Margaret Cavendish and the Metaphysics of Only Nature. But more importantly, he's been running 2 weekly Cavendish-related reading groups since February 2020. Some information can be found on his website, which is johnshaheen.com. I don't have a color printer, and I can barely read the website, but correct me if that's not right. And that's JONSHAHEEN.com. And interested parties are encouraged to contact him. Thank you for posting that for further information.
Cool, thank you. Let me share my screen. That's probably it. And that's probably how it's supposed to look. Thanks for inviting me to take part, to all of you who are organizing. And I'm also very jealous of the t-shirt and feel my 6-year-old stylist should be fired for not finding it. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about the what Cavendish thinks the metaphysics of mental illness is. So this is going to be, I guess, in a way similar to the stuff that Anne was saying. And Anne doesn't miss much, but I have to. I think I found something that will be interesting. So let me get to it. So as Anne was saying, the mind isn't all that special for Cavendish. So, but the first thing we need to ask, if we're going to talk about mental illness, is, well, what is this mind? What's the mental thing? And of course, I guess we all know for Cavendish that human minds aren't particularly special in comparison with animal minds. So man is singular in this, and I guess that means only this, that he's of an upright and straight shape, of which no other animal but man is. So eventually his organ pipes, nerves, sinews, and joints are in a straight and equal posture to each other, which is the cause man's tongue and organs are more apt for speech than those of any other creature. And by the way, I think this is sort of incorporated in the blazing world. If you think about, in what way are, for example, the worm men half men? I think the answer is that they're standing upright and can talk, but otherwise they know worm stuff. So that's what I think that hybridization is about. Side note. Okay, human minds not special relative to animal minds, also not special in general, right? Because Cavendish is also a panpsychist. So when Cavendish wants to account for the rational soul of man, she says this natural soul, otherwise called reason, is nothing else but corporeal natural self-motion, or a particle of the purest, most subtle and active part of matter, which I call animate. Which animate matter is the life and soul of nature. And the life part is sensitive matter and the soul part is rational matter. The life and soul of nature and consequently of man and all other creatures. So there's nothing like a Leibniz's mill problem for Cavendish when she makes sense of the rational soul in terms of matter. She thinks that all she has to say to account for the cognitive abilities of humans is to say that their rational soul is just the rational matter that's in them. So that tells you something about the capacities of rational matter in general, if all it takes to account for the cognitive faculties of humans is pointing at their rational matter. Okay, so human minds aren't special versus animal minds. Minds in general, animal minds in general aren't special relative to nature. So however we're going to make sense of mental illness as a kind of disorder will just be however we make sense of disorder generally. And that's basically what Cavendish says, right? So in late Cavendish, at least, she seems to concede this claim, and it's a little bit more complicated for the reasons that Anne noticed. Cavendish seems to concede this claim that all diseases proceed but from irregular motions. All right, there's also the stuff about caused by conceit or operating by rote. But she concedes in this exchange, right? She puts this in someone else's mouth. She says all diseases proceed but from irregular motions. I answer, these irregular motions are so numerous, different, and various that all the artists in nature are not able to rectify them. Her point here is that there is no universal medicine, but it's not that diseases proceed from something other than irregular motions, right? So she sort of she concedes that in this passage, that indeed it's all about irregular motion. This is in late Cavendish, and the reason I say that is that the stuff that Anne noticed about decay of vital parts is more elaborate and more present earlier. So like in the 1663 edition of PPO, there's also mistempering or distempering of matter, which has to do with the fact that in PPO, but not necessarily later, inanimate matter comes in degrees and tempers as well, and you kind of have to respect them to get things to work out right. In OEP and grounds, inanimate matter is just this like undifferentiated stuff, but that's not true in PPO. Okay, side note. By late Cavendish, it's all just about disorder, disordered motions. And because it's just about disordered motions, and in fact, even in PPO, mental madness in particular is just about disordered motions, that suggests a sort of surprising treatment, which is sort of any way that you could get the motions to become orderly again would fix it. So she says, there's great reason why music should cure madness in the mind. For this sort of madness is no other but the rational matter and motions that are in the brain and heart, put out of their natural motion. And the rational matter and motions having a natural sympathy with music may be composed into their right order, but it must be such music, etc., like the right kind of music. It's got to have the right rhythm or whatever to be orderly. Okay, so that's what mental illness is about, just disordered motions. The fact that it's disordered motions suggests that any kind of treatment that could get the motions to get back in the right order would work, as long as it's targeted at their particular irregularity. But I want to ask, and here I think we get kind of an interesting question, whether mental illnesses are themselves, if they're about what rational matter is doing, is mental illness itself somehow rational? So here's like a standard Cavendish tension. How is nature's regular order supposed to be consistent with local disorder? And you go to the literature and you find some answers. Maybe nature's order is violable, can be violated because of free will. Or maybe the so-called disorders only look disordered from our parochial perspective, or maybe the local disorders are somehow necessary or part of nature's overarching order or balance. You can find those answers. And we can ask the question then, sort of transforming it a little bit, how is rational matter's rationality consistent with mental illness? And we can try out, sort of mutatis mutandum, mutandis, whatever it is, try out the corresponding answers. I don't think we want to say that rational matter can be anything other than rational, or we'll lose a grip on what we're talking about. But the other answers seem reasonably plausible. Maybe mental illness only looks irrational from our parochial perspective, or maybe mental illness is necessary for a part of rational matter's rationality. But that gives rise to a question, which I think is probably a good question. What's the actual relationship between human rationality and rational matter's rationality? So, and this is supposed to be like the question, what's the relationship between human good and divine good if God does stuff that looks evil to us and so on, right? Where like the possible answers are good in exactly the same sense, good in a merely analogous sense, good in a completely different sense. We can here say, well, maybe, rational matter is rational in the same sense that humans are rational, or a merely analogous sense, or a completely different sense. We should find the answer to that question in Cavendish. And I think we can if we look at what disorder is. So what is order in Cavendish? Well, this is the kind of thing I think everybody talks about. I'm going to call it nature's regular order. She appeals to it when she says, there be sense and reason, which is not only motion, but a regular and well-ordered self-motion, apparent in the wonderful and various productions, generations, transformations, dissolutions, compositions, and other actions of nature, in all nature's parts and particles. So that is the regular and well-ordered self-motion that is apparent. We can see it, right? This is something that needs to be explained. Here's a quote that's not actually Cavendish, but I think Cavendish agrees with it. We shouldn't presume that it's disorder that requires an explanation, right? Accounts that say that the order that nature has is somehow divinely imposed then create for themselves a problem of explaining how the order can ever fail. How can there ever be disorder if God put the order there? This I learned from Marcy Lascano as a way of thinking about certain accounts in the literature of where the order is coming from God. You really have a problem then in explaining disorder, which is why freedom plays such a big role in those accounts. But we shouldn't presume disorder is the thing that requires explanation. Order is the thing that requires explanation, right? Order must have been a task, a problem that's been more or less successfully solved. This isn't a Cavendish quote, but I think Cavendish agrees with it. And I think that's why Cavendish, when she argues for her view, she seems to think that the ubiquity of animate matter is what best explains nature's regular order. So indeed, it is the regular order in nature that requires explanation, and Cavendish's metaphysics is supposed to be that explanation. So that's not the only kind of order in nature. People sometimes read all of Cavendish's order comments as being about that same order. So this is a popular passage where people read the bolded part out of context. So all the motions are so ordered by nature's wisdom as not anything in nature can be otherwise, unless by a supernatural command and power of God. Some of you have heard me say this before. So ordered, meaning ordered how? Well, ordered in the following way, so that things can't be different. So Cunning reads this as a statement of determinism. Boyle reads this as a statement of once God sets up the rules for the proper motions of parts of nature, they can't be changed without God changing them. I think that so doesn't point forward cataphorically. I think it points backwards anaphorically. So things are ordered so that there's the commixture of those mentioned parts of animate and inanimate matter. And if you look at the full context of this passage, the whole thing is about complete blending. So the complete blending is the order that's at issue here that can't be changed except by God, right? So the thing that can't be otherwise is that even the smallest conceivable or imaginable parts or particles of nature are composites of animate and inanimate matter, which you probably heard me say a lot if you've heard me before. So that order, by the way, that constitutive order, that complete blending, that is inviolable, right? That is not anything in nature can be otherwise. It's such that not anything in nature can be otherwise unless by supernatural command and power of God. Nature's regular order, the orderly behavior of its parts, is naturally violable, because it's an accomplishment of animate, including rational matter. It's something that rational matter has to manage to do. But along the way to trying to do it, it will have to tear things apart and there will be other disorders. So I'll remind you of some things and I'll answer my question. Cavendish thinks regular order gets explained by the ubiquity of animate matter. That's how she argues for her metaphysics. And then what animate matter is able to do, right? In order to do its job, it has to have some tendencies towards sympathetic motions, for example. Those can not only cause, but also cure through music, mental illness. Those same sympathetic tendencies that can cause and cure mental illness allow rational matter to organize nature. So my question was, this was headed towards an answer. What's the actual relationship between human rationality and rational matter's rationality? I think they have to be rationality in exactly the same sense. So I think they have to be rationality in exactly the same sense. Humans and rational matter are both rational in that sense. Recall, rational matter is the soul of nature and consequently of man. So it's the rationality of nature that men have, the rationality of the soul of nature, that is rational matter, that men have. But rational matter also has this larger scale aim, ordering all of nature. That's a larger scale aim than human rationality has. And so it will sometimes produce mental illness because it's going for different things. So I think there's an interesting point here where the rationality of rational matter sometimes will have to do with moving sympathetically with things that are in its immediate area, and that sort of smaller scale than human minds, which are things that have to do with particular creatures, which are larger than those smallest bits of rational matter. But also rational matter, I think, is engaged in this broader project of ordering all of nature, and that's larger scale. So that's how the rationality of rational matter can be consistent with something that is paradigmatically irrational, insofar as mental illness is that. Okay, that's all. Thanks.